Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. There are 12 Republicans who've announced that they would like to replace Governor Andy Beshear as the next governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. However, only one of them will emerge, and we'll find out who that person is on May the 16th. That is the primary. To help you further understand the candidates and why they're running and where they stand on the issues, CPC is hosting these forums. Joining us on this forum is Kentucky's 51st Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. Daniel, welcome to the forum.
Richard, I appreciate you as always.
Well, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us and really letting the voters know more about your candidacy, why you're running, and what you would do if you did become Kentucky's next governor. So Daniel, I'm going to go back to what I just led out with. There are 12 fellow Kentuckians who are vying for the Republican nomination for governor here in Kentucky. How do you distinguish yourself from the other candidates?
Well, Richard, I think the proof is in the pudding. You know, I've been in the trenches and fighting for the interest of the men, women, and children of all 120 counties over these last 3 years. And there have been a lot of consequential decisions that have come across our desk. You think about when the governor shut down churches. I went on the steps of the Capitol and said that was unconstitutional. He did so anyways, but went into federal court, and after 9 days got churches reopened in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. When it came to the Biden administration wanting to disregard the 10th Amendment to our Constitution and try to force vaccine mandates on our state, I went into federal court and got those vaccine mandates stopped in the Commonwealth. And when it comes to the issue of life, I'm proud to say that because our office has defended the pro-life legislation that was passed by the General Assembly, since last August, the abortion facilities have been closed in Kentucky. So we have not only talked the talk, but we've walked the walk. We've taken action when others wouldn't. And again, I think that some folks are going to run on ads in this campaign, but I'm certainly going to run on a record.
So what I'm hearing from you, Daniel, is that your capacity as Attorney General has put you in the arena where you have fought for these principles, many conservative principles that the voters care about.
Absolutely. And I think that you have a track record with me, and certainly want to make sure that we restore common sense and conservative values to our governor's office. We live in a time and age where legacy media, talking about the big liberal newspapers, a Democrat governor, frankly, an absent governor here, and then a Democrat president in DC and the far left have created essentially the perfect storm of conditions that, if left unchecked, will destroy our values here in Kentucky, will destroy the pensions of teachers, firefighters, and police officers, will undermine our coal industry and destroy our economy. And in 2023, we have a transformational moment to make a change and go in a different direction here in Kentucky. And I hope folks will entrust me with the opportunity to be that candidate and to be that nominee that carries the mantle for the Republican Party come November.
Of course, many of the Republican voters agree with you entirely on that, but you need more than just Republican voters to win. Well, of course, you need Republicans in the primary. You're going to need more than Republican voters in the general, I believe.
I'll take that though. It's hopefully we'll make it through May, and we will have to have this obviously conversation again too.
Where I was going with that though is how do you explain Governor Beshear's high approval ratings? I've seen different numbers in the upper 50s, low 60th percentile in approval ratings. How would you address why is he so favorable with you? Right
Well,
now?
I think, most of that is based on, any governor has to display competency when there becomes a natural disaster, whether it be tornadoes in West Kentucky or flooding in Eastern Kentucky. That is, again, as a governor, you have to display competency in those issues and demonstrate compassion. What we have to do as Republicans is remind citizens of what he has done over these last 3 years. Meaning he's going to have to take credit for the fact that he shut down churches in the midst of a pandemic and disregarded the First Amendment of our Constitution. He's going to have to take credit for the fact that he shut down small businesses and chose winners and losers and told people they were essential and non-essential. He's going to have to take ownership for that. He's going to have to take ownership for the fact that he, on day one, got rid of the Board of Education, Kentucky Board of Education, put in his board, and his board elected or appointed Jason Glass to be the education commissioner. And as you know, from following some of the work that was happening in the legislature, there was a decision by Jason Glass when he asked a question about any teacher that might be expressing concern about the gender ideology curriculum that's making its way into our schools. Jason Glass said they need to find another job. My response to Jason Glass is that he needs to find another job. And if I'm fortunate to be the governor, not only will he find another job, but Andy Beshear is going to find another job as well.
Very good. Regarding Andy Beshear, your latest campaign ad points out Governor Beshear's closure of churches during the COVID pandemic. You called the shutdown of churches unconstitutional, and as you mentioned, you did take them to court. How would you have approached that differently? Would you have established relationships with the churches across Kentucky? Would you have offered guidelines for the churches? What would you have done differently?
Well, you all will recall that all the churches wanted, as I spoke to Pastor Fugit and other pastors across Kentucky, what they wanted was to have the same opportunity that the big box stores, the Lowe's and the Targets and other places were, to allow people to still safely be able to attend church. That's all they were asking for, was to be able to do that. That accommodation, especially in light of the First Amendment that says that we should be able to express ourselves freely through worship, should have been given to them. But again, Governor Beshear doesn't understand our values. If he understood our values, he wouldn't have shut down churches. If he understood our values, he would be daily highlighting the failures of the Biden administration when it comes to their policies at the southern border, because we know fentanyl is coming across the southern border and is impacting and hurting our folks right here in Kentucky. If he understood our values, he would be speaking up for the coal industry, even though the Biden administration wants to continue to obliterate the coal industry. So I would have talked with pastors all across Kentucky, again, understanding that they just simply wanted to have the same accommodations that every other big box store, which was allowed to stay open during that period of time. Any given Sunday, you drive past a church parking lot and see that there were no cars in that parking lot. You could go by Lowe's or Target and see countless cars in those parking lots and recognize that there were just as many people inside. That was untenable, and that should not have happened. And again, the governor was in a vacuum. He was listening to just a few people. And a governor has to be willing to talk to folks just outside of a bubble. And I hope I've demonstrated over these last 3 years that I will do that.
Attorney General Cameron, you have been an advocate for the sanctity of human life. You've defended Kentucky's pro-life laws in your official capacity. On your website, you have a quote that says, and I believe this is you saying it, science is supporting what we've already known to be true. What Scripture tells us is true, that the unborn are human lives, just like yours and mine. Now, it's clear that your faith, and we've had several conversations about this before, your faith informs your public policy positions. But how do you address those who say that you should keep your religious beliefs to yourself and out of public office?
Well, I tell the gender ideology folks, the far left, they're not keeping their philosophy at home. They're bringing that to the marketplace of ideas. And as you and I have talked, that's why, Commonwealth Policy Center is so important. It's because you all make a decision to be engaged on Christian principles in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's fundamental. I was just with some folks in Hardin County, a gentleman, Paige Hardin, who's a pastor and is part of the founding body of North Hardin Christian, was saying that he hadn't really been engaged in politics before now, but he recognizes that Christians have to be involved in the conversation. Otherwise, we cede the ground. We can no longer cede the ground. We have to be engaged. I know there are a lot of members of our legislature that are willing to step up to the plate and be engaged and talk about biblical principles. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should never be ashamed of Jesus Christ and his word. And I certainly won't be a governor that's ashamed of them.
Very good. You recently joined 22 other states' attorney generals opposing the Biden administration's efforts to make gas stoves illegal. In your press release, you referred to the 10th Amendment, which essentially reserves rights to the states to make policies that are not enumerated to the federal government. How important is it for states to push back against the federal government when there's overreach? And the reason I even ask that is because I think there might be a sense that the federal government is so big and so powerful, does it even make a difference? Does it make a difference?
It absolutely makes a difference. Richard, you and I have had several conversations about this. When the Biden administration said we are going to force vaccine mandates on the states, they were trying to disregard the 10th Amendment to our Constitution that says pretty plainly that those powers that are not expressly given to the federal government are reserved to the states. We, as citizens of Kentucky, get to make a decision about the health, safety, and well-being of our citizens. That's what's generally referred to as a state's police power. Bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. should not be in a position to have that opportunity. We get to make that decision. And that's why we went into federal court. And it did make a difference because we got the OSHA mandate halted here in Kentucky. We got the Head Start agency mandate halted in Kentucky, and we got the federal contractor mandate halted in Kentucky. Otherwise, those vaccine mandates would have been in place if we wouldn't have gone into federal court. That's why it's important to have someone in the governor's office that is going to speak out daily for the interests of our state. I want to build an alliance of governors, if you will, with folks like Governor DeSantis in Florida and Senator Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas and Glenn Youngkin in Virginia to again, create an alliance of governors that will defend and stand up for the values of our states and also push back against the excesses we see coming out of the Biden administration.
Daniel, there is an effort in the state legislature to eliminate state income taxes. This last session reduced it down to 4%. And the goal is to eventually phase it out. Is this the right way to phasing out state income taxes to put more money into the pockets of working people? Is this something that you support?
Absolutely. I think if you're sitting at home right now and you're watching, you need to have more of your money in your pocket to make decisions for not only yourself, but your family. Me and Mackenzie obviously have a 15-month-old at home, Theodore now, and the budget is tight. And the more money that we can have in our pocket at the end of the day, it's not just for folks at the top of the bracket, it's for everybody. The more money that you can have in your pocket at the end of the day is important. And from a global perspective, it also gives us a competitive advantage when it comes to states that surround us. Tennessee, for a number of years, has had a 0% income tax. I know as I talk to people that are trying to recruit businesses into Kentucky, one of the challenges they have of bringing businesses into Kentucky is that executives don't necessarily want to come here because we don't have that low income tax, and they recognize that they can go across the border to get that. So I think this is an important step that Kentucky is making. I applaud the work of our legislature for getting that done. As a governor, I will continue to support the effort to get it as fast to zero as we possibly can.
Related to the state budget, the state legislature expanded gambling to sports gambling. About 22 million additional dollars are projected to come into the state coffers. Of course, I think you know, and the listeners and viewers know that CPC has been opposed to expanded gambling, but here it is, that issue's done. Can't do a lot about it now. But do you think, and here's the question, do you think that the state is prepared to deal with the increase in problem gambling or compulsive gamblers? Are they prepared to deal with the negative secondary effect related to this expansion?
I sure hope so. And as the next governor, I'll certainly, make that a priority. We obviously, one of the challenges of having something like this is there are the downstream effects of folks that, perhaps aren't in a position to be as responsible with, gambling. And so we got to make sure that we have, policies in place and regulations in place that keep people from betting their house on a particular game, or it's obviously something we're going to have to continue to follow in the years to come.
I want to press into that just a little bit, because most people who gamble see it as a form of entertainment. They can limit how much they spend. But again, it's a small percentage that has no control when it comes to limiting their time at a casino or betting on horses or betting on sports. There have been previous discussions, private discussions about capping how much people can bet. Would that be something theoretically that the government, I'm going to ask this from a legal perspective. We've had conversations about people who receive state aid of some kind. Is there legal grounds to do that? Let's say somebody who's receiving they're on food stamps or receiving some kind of state support. Is that something the legislature could do to help people so they don't bet the house, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that's something we certainly could look into in our office. I don't have an answer right off the top of my head, but it seems like, somebody's receiving federal benefits, or essentially what are taxpayer dollars. Those things need to go to essentials and not, to betting at a casino or at a horse track.
And the thought here, and this is probably a conversation for another day, but the thought is to help people who might have a problem or who are already in a tough situation, to not get into a further hole or to not lose everything. It's out of the really, born out of goodwill, trying to preserve their wealth and trying to keep them from making a bad decision.
Yeah, I certainly think that, there has to be altruistic, goals to make sure that, as we have gambling here in Kentucky, that we have a system in place that keeps people from, making decisions ultimately that can ruin them and ruin their families.
Another hot issue in the news in this last week is the issue of fairness in women's sports. Former UK swimmer Riley Gaines was speaking to a group in California. She was assaulted by a man who identifies as female, actually held captive for a while. Her view is was not received well there. This was a bill that the Kentucky legislature passed last session. They kept girls on the girls sports teams, boys, biological boys on the boys sports teams. Governor Andy Beshear vetoed that legislation. Is that something you would have signed into law?
I absolutely would have signed it. And again, it's just another indication that this governor is out of step with the values of Kentucky. The idea that a biological male could compete with women who have trained their entire lives to be at the top of their game. Riley Gaines is a great example of this. Competed and trained daily to be one of the best swimmers in the country, and to have to share the stage, if you will, to share a medal, if you will, with a biological male just seems crazy to me. It's crazy that we even have to have this conversation. Again, most folks here in Kentucky recognize that men should not be competing in women's sports. It's unfortunate that we had a governor that did not understand that. Again, he does not understand the values of Kentuckians in all 120 counties. And that's why he has to be replaced, because on issue after issue, you think it's bad now. Imagine a Governor Beshear in a second term where he's not bound by the idea of reelection. It will get worse for Kentucky. And that's why right now in 2023, this is a pivotal moment, is that we have to do a course correction. His mere presence in the governor's office emboldens the far left, and that has to end. We as citizens here in Kentucky have an opportunity to make that happen.
Daniel, in July of last year, the Kentucky Department of Education issued an LGBT toolkit and LGBT guidance for public school teachers. Part of that guidance was that teachers use the preferred gender pronouns of students and not to tell parents about that. Of course, the state legislature corrected that. They passed Senate Bill 150. They protected the conscience rights of teachers and staff members. They also restricted guidance counselors from advising students who might suffer from gender dysphoria. They restricted them from guidance along those lines. This was a bill, by the way, that Governor Andy Beshear vetoed. It was comprehensive. It dealt with a number of other things besides the preferred gender pronouns. I guess I'll mention some of the others. One was it prevented minors from pursuing hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and surgical interventions. It required local school districts to have a policy on bathrooms and changing areas that they correspond with the biological sex of students. It also kept sex ed of any kind, including LGBT indoctrination, from K through 5 classrooms. Those are the main points of the bill. Governor Andy Beshear vetoed this. Is this legislation that you would have signed if you were governor? Oh,
I would have signed it in a heartbeat. Look, it is, again, it is absolutely, it's crazy that we even have to have this conversation. We as Kentuckians recognize that men should not be playing in women's sports. We recognize that we need to protect our children. There are even, and a lot of your watchers know this, there are even liberal European countries that have pulled back on this gender transition surgery for minors. I mean, we are in many ways behind them. Again, to have a governor that is okay with allowing mutilation of our minors, is just not consistent with the values of Kentucky. And we've got to do everything we can to make sure that Kentucky doesn't look like Massachusetts or California. And there is an effort afoot in the Commonwealth, and it's being led by Jason Glass at the Department of Education. It's been led by the far left that are trying to creep in to change the identity of Kentucky. That cannot stand. And you know, one of the things I hope has been demonstrated over these last 3 years is that I'm willing to stand up to these far left interests, and I will do what's right by the men, women, and children of all 120 counties. I'll do what's right, regardless of if they're protesting on our front lawn, regardless if I'm being disparaged on CNN or MSNBC. I will do what's right by the laws of Kentucky. And you need that type of strong leadership in a state, because if you don't have it, these far left interests will continue to advance the ball. We've got to be in a position to push back. If I'm governor, we will do that.
Commissioner Glass had a statement after the legislature passed Senate Bill 150, and he doubled down. He criticized the legislature for passing that bill, and he had a shout out to LGBT identified students. He said something to the effect that we see you, we hear you, we care about you, and then went on to say that there will be an LGBT summit for students in the fall. There's two things here. One is, I think the political left comes across as being those who care about people who might be a marginalized class. LGBT identified students often are bullied or harassed. How would you respond, though, to the idea that the left cares more about kids who are LGBT identified than the right cares about those kids? How would you respond?
Well, look, I think what we have tried to make abundantly clear is that we care about not allowing kids to make irreversible decisions before they're adults. Now, if you're older than 18 and want to make a decision like this, then that's your choice. But in Kentucky, we need to look after our kids. And that's the most compassionate view that you can have, is to have folks in Kentucky that want to look out for kids and not allow them to mutilate themselves. Especially, you know, kids, look, you go through phases, and a kid should just be allowed to be a kid and not be changing their body and all of those things. And so that is, as a person of the right, but that is a person of scripture as well, that recognizes that, yes, we've got to be compassionate, but how we need to demonstrate compassion is not to allow kids to mutilate themselves as minors. And the other thing I'll say about Jason Glass is, again, if you're watching, what you've heard from Richard is that Jason Glass is using your taxpayer dollars to fund these things. Parents, you should be incensed by this, but you have a governor that has allowed this to foment at the Kentucky Department of Education. And again, you and I have an opportunity to stop this in its tracks if we make a good decision in May, but if we also make a good decision in November. You know, again, I will reiterate what I said earlier, which is that, Jason Glass told teachers if they have any issue with the gender ideology, that they need to find a different job. And my answer to him is that no, Jason Glass needs to find another job. So if you help me in May, I'll help you in November, and I'll make sure that not only does Jason Glass find another job, but that Andy Beshear finds another job as well.
What would be your recommendation if there was a commissioner of education that actually holds an LGBT summit for students, essentially affirming them in ways that we would disagree, that we would say are simply not appropriate for Department of Education to do? And this is what's happening in the Commonwealth in the fall sometime.
Yeah, I think, again, Jason Glass needs to be fired. And I think as the next governor of Kentucky, I will appoint a board of education that recognizes that our school systems, and there are a lot of teachers that recognize this as well, our school systems cannot be the incubators for liberal far left indoctrination. We need to get back to the basics of reading, writing, and math. Right now, we have to have kids coming out of school that are really ready to take on these global challenges. Right now, China, they aren't focused on gender ideology. They're focused on the United States of America and being more competitive. We've got to keep that in the forefront of our mind, that there are global interests out there right now that want to see us focus on other things that don't make us as competitive and don't make us as successful. We've got to get back to those things that have made not only this Commonwealth great, but have made this country great.
One of your priorities as Attorney General has been to combat the drug trade, specifically the opioid epidemic. There's an opioid advisory committee, abatement committee, just received a lot of money from the federal government, $470 million, something like
Well,
that.
yeah, actually, that money
So-
came from the farm wholesalers and manufacturers and distributors of opioids. And so the federal government's not involved in this. This is holding accountable those companies that came in and helped exacerbate the opioid crisis that we have in Kentucky. And we've lost, based on the most recent report from the Kentucky Office of Drug Control Policy, 2,250 individuals to overdoses. 70% of that was because fentanyl. So we brought in nearly $900 million to help with this. The Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission is receiving 50% of those dollars, and they are now in the reviewing of applications to see how they're going to distribute that money in this year and in the following years. And then the other 50% of the money flows right to the counties and cities. And so they've already started to receive checks. I know I've talked to mayors and county judges that have received their money and are now in the process of just trying to figure out how best to use it to help stem the tide of this epidemic that has plagued our people for far too long. You know, in addition to bringing in the money, we've also got 2 lawsuits against the Biden administration right now, holding them accountable for their failures at the southern border. I've also urged the Biden administration to label fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction and to label the Jalisco and Sinaloa cartels foreign terrorist organizations. And so this is a multifaceted approach. In fact, later today, I'll be over in Leslie County for a fentanyl forum that we have undertaken to focus exclusively on fentanyl and see how it's impacting folks all across Kentucky. So this is a big issue and it's a big challenge, but we're up to the task. And if I'm governor, we could continue this work because it's important to Kentucky.
I know the state legislature legalized medical marijuana. There's been, I think, popular support for this idea. However, are you concerned that could be a backdoor legalization of recreational, where it's too easy to get a medical needs card, but where this just essentially turns into a recreational type program?
Yeah, we are going to have to heavily regulate this area, and I know that there is essentially a 2-year ramp to this law going into effect. And so, as the next governor, I want to make sure that there are safeguards in place that make sure that we never have recreational marijuana in Kentucky. As I talk to the law enforcement community, they've expressed grave concerns about not being able to fully regulate this and having this turn into recreational marijuana. I want to work with the Kentucky State Police and all of our law enforcement agencies across Kentucky to make sure that we have a plan in place that regulates this such that it never becomes recreational marijuana.
Daniel, there was a tragedy in Louisville, a mass shooting at a bank there, took the lives of 5 people, and this is still fresh on our minds. And I want to be sensitive to talk about this because there needs to be space for those who lost loved ones. They're grieving. We need to be sensitive, and yet there are others pushing hard for some kind of more gun restrictions or a red flag law. What is your just a general response to mass shootings? What is the solution? We've seen an increase in mass shootings in the last several decades, but there are increasing calls for restrictions or red flag laws. As the governor, this is an issue that you're going to be asked about. What are your thoughts right now?
Yeah, well, my thoughts right now are just with the families that are grieving. And I was after the tragedy unfolded in Louisville, I was downtown and had an occasion to talk to some of the officers that were responding to that episode. Let me just say to any first responders or any folks in the law enforcement community that are watching right now, I appreciate you. All of Kentucky respects you and are grateful that you run towards danger when others are running away. And we know that every day you sacrifice to make sure that we are safe in our homes. And the fact that law enforcement responded so quickly is proof that they got there and they could have been much worse. And I'm just so grateful for the way in which they responded. And so I think obviously there will be time for public policy conversations on this, but I'm not for gun control. And I know that the mayor in Louisville has already said something to that effect. And I suspect Andy Bashir is going to say something like that. If they want to run on gun control, so be it. But we live in a fallen world. Richard, you know that, and you know, I was just in a devotional yesterday. I think it's James 5:16 says that we need to pray in earnest, and also in doing so, confess our own sins, and because the prayers of a righteous person. And so I think that as you all are going about your day, I just ask that you go to your knees and pray for our nation, because there is evil in this world. And that was what was displayed on Monday, pure evil. And I'm grateful for our law enforcement community that stopped that evil. But we've got to acknowledge that if we don't pray, we don't engage in the spiritual battle that's happening in this country, we're going to continue to lose. And so we've got to keep fighting on that front. Again, there will be policy discussions. You know, I'm not going to be supporting any sort of gun control, but I recognize that there are a lot of folks grieving right now. Nicholas Wilt, one of the officers that is in critical condition, continue to pray for him. Officer Galloway obviously was injured, but ultimately brought down the person that was that created this tragedy in Louisville. So again, I appreciate our law enforcement community immensely.
Thank you. We are running out of time. Two last questions. One is, what kind of people do you look for to surround yourself with as cabinet secretaries or advisors? What are the character traits that you're looking for in those who will surround you if you're elected governor?
Well, I think, you know, just the overwhelming ability to show and demonstrate compassion to Kentuckians and have a heart for Kentucky and the Commonwealth and want to see it flourish and thrive. Want to make sure that the value system set aligns with my values set, and recognize that, you know, for me, you know, Christ is the priority. I know when Mackenzie and I jumped into this race, you know, some folks said, well, why aren't you running for a second term as Attorney General? And, you know, our response is that, you know, our status isn't built on being the Attorney General, and status wouldn't even be as governor. My identity is as a Christ follower, as a husband to Mackenzie and a father to Theodore. And so those are important to us, and that would be something that would be important to our cabinet secretaries. Again, recognizing the values of Kentucky and making sure that we don't have something like Governor Bashir has at the Department of Education. So it's going to be really important that values align, that they have overwhelming compassion and an overwhelming heart for the needs of Kentucky, and recognize that Christ plays a big part in my life, and hope in theirs as well.
Very good. Last question is, what would you consider a successful governorship if you do make it out of the May 16th primary and then go on to win in November? How would you gauge a successful run for governor? What would be a few policy positions or a few things that would mark success for governorship?
Well, an education system that better reflects our values, making sure that we get our crime and drug problems under control, and also just making sure that we have a Kentucky that looks like the one that you and your viewers and I understand, and one in which our children have more prosperity, that we are a shining city on a hill, and that we are the best and brightest example of what democracy can look like within our 50 states.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you as well.
Best to you on the campaign trail.
Appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you, guys.